All right, so we've built a game and can't do all this work for nothing, right? So let's talk about how to export. Today I'm going to show you how we can export a build. I'm going to be exporting for Windows and web, and we'll talk about some of the ins and outs. We'll also implement some feature locking so that we can keep some of our debug code from happening with our release build. And at the end of the video, you'll be able to have a build that you're ready to put on itch.io or even Steam if you've developed it far enough, or just send to a friend to test and give you feedback to help you develop your game further. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GD script. This is the Metroidvania Forge. All right, everybody, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to review everything that we need to do to get our project here exported so that we could deploy it for playtesting or even for release, technically. Obviously, our game's not ready for release, but we're going to talk about some of the settings. Now, I'm going to be focusing on exporting for Windows. Linux and Mac OS are going to be very similar. Of course, Mac OS is going to be limited. You're going to have to be on an Apple, a Mac computer to be able to do that. Additionally, Android is it's definitely doable on Windows. It's just going to require installing more stuff, and I'm not going to get there, and I'm not going to test it. But I'm going to point out a few things that are maybe important information for you to know as we get going with that. But before we do any exporting, I want to talk about prepping our project just a little bit for that export. And we'll talk about release bugs versus a debug export, which is going to look kind of the same, but there are some differences and some advantages for a release build. All right. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to point out is I've had in my project settings, when I have my run here, it's running my level 1 scene. And this is pretty common for me to set my project to run something like the playground or some other scene other than the title screen, because it's just more convenient, right? And I think that's fine. But obviously, at some point, we got to get over that, and we've got to set this to be our title screen. And so we can just select it here. And that is a really weird thumbnail for the title screen. And set that. So now when I hit F5, it's going to run the title screen. Okay. All right. So that's all well and good. So now our project is set up so that when somebody runs the game, they'll be greeted with this title screen. In addition to that, if you wanted to, there's some options about the boot splash. So right now it's got a selectable color. You can show an image. You can make it full size. And I think if you do this stuff, then it's going to replace that little Godot boot up screen that it shows. Okay, so you can do that if you want to. I'm not really going to mess with that, though. I'm pretty happy with it. A couple things that are worth checking. Make sure your name is good here. And then an icon is worth having. And you're going to want to probably set up your Windows native icon and a Mac OS native icon. I'm not really going to do that today, but obviously at some point, again, these are things that you're going to want to work on before you get ready to say, release this on itch.io or Steam or something like that. Because you don't want just a default Godot icon, nothing against the Godot icon, but obviously you want this to represent your game and look professional, okay? So those are just a few things. Now this name is going to appear on the project. It's going to appear on the title screen. In fact, let me run F5 again, does it? Yeah, I mean, this is kind of misleading because we're in a Godot thing, but we'll look at that and it should appear on our title bar when we export a build for Windows. Okay, now in order to export a project, we come up here to Project in the menu and just come down to Export. And I've gone and deleted all of my export templates. So this is going to match many of you. If you've got templates installed, you might see something slightly different. And in fact, you may even have templates for older versions of Godot, and so you're going to need to update those. So you'll notice right now my export window is pretty empty looking. So what we need to do is we need to add, and we could choose a platform that we want to export to. So I'm going to select Windows Desktop. And you see these errors down here. No export template found at expected path. This is the most common one. And there's a couple ways to manage that. But when we have this error, you're going to see this little text here to manage export templates. So you can just click that. Now this export template manager, it's also available under Editor and then Manage Export Templates. Okay. You can see that my export templates are missing for the current version of Godot, the one I'm running. So then it says download or install them. And you can just leave it on best available mirror, or you could change it if you want. But you just click this download and install. Alternatively, if you know where you want to go find them, if you want to go get them from the Godot site, you can. and then use this install from file option. I've never had a need to do that. It always seems to work just fine. So I'm going to do this. I don't know how quick this is going to be. I'll probably fast forward. You see it's going to be 1.2 gigs to install this template. There we go. Okay, so now we can see my export templates are installed and ready to be used. Okay, so I can close this now. And when I come back to project and export, now I don't have any warnings for exporting a Windows desktop. Additionally, we could add some other types. I think a really common one that we're going to want to export is web. So I'm going to add that. And you can see those templates appear to be sufficient for exporting this as well. So for every type of, or every platform that you're targeting, you're going to export these. There's a lot of configuration options that I'm not really intent on reviewing here. But there are maybe a couple that we can talk about. Some of the things that you'll notice are like architecture versions. And for the most part, we can kind of leave this alone, but you may need to export specific versions if you need to target ARM 64 or something like that. The vast majority of modern PCs are going to be an x86 64-bit processor, so we're fine with that. But of course, this might come to light if you have people with specific systems or PCs, laptops that you want to test on, then, send them a build. If it doesn't work, then you can kind of work those things out. In particular, there's a lot of stuff under resources, patches, features. Here you can do things like feature flags that you can add to your build. And there's a way to check those. I'm going to show you how to check one basic feature flag, but I'm not going to go in depth into that either. Encryption. I think this is actually an option that when you're ready to export it, you're probably going to want to turn that on, okay, when you want to export a release build. But for now, just our debug and stuff, we don't need to get too far into that. So hopefully by the end of this entire series, I'll give you some more details on some of these. To be honest, I'm not super familiar with a couple of them, so, it'd be fun. There are also advanced options. Definitely not going to get into those today, but make sure it's runnable. That would be important, wouldn't it? Now, there's a couple other things down here, like for the application, you can select an icon. So if you had one set up, you could do that. You might want to include your versions, company name. I could put Michael Games here. Product name, Metroidvania Forge. Okay. So just things that you can add here. That's good enough for now. Looking at the web, there's not a whole lot of options that I would suggest that you toggle here. Obviously, we've got some texture compression options that might be useful if you're targeting mobile. A little note though, if you export the project for web and you're running the game on a mobile device, it is going to register as a web version. It is a web project. So there are some Godot specific flags that we'll look at. And this is just kind of like a little side note. If you're checking to see if it's web or mobile, running it on a browser on mobile, it's going to register as web. Okay, so just FYI. It's only going to register as mobile if you actually are exporting like an APK, an app for Android or something like that, and then run the app natively. There are some things, obviously, there's, icons and header includes and other things like that you can add here, because this is technically going to bundle your project up and have like a little web page that can run it, okay? Different icon sizes, a background color. That stuff is fun to play around with, but most of those settings are not critical. In fact, the default settings that Godot gives us are going to be perfect, so I'm just going to go ahead and export a project. You'll notice we've got export all, export project, and export this package or zip file. This is, you can see it's not a playable build, it's just a project data without the Godot executable. So this is for advanced users typically. I'm going to go ahead and export my project, and you need to pick a location. And I've of course already actually exported this before. So I'm going to make a new folder here. Let's click this new folder button. I'll just call it builds. And then in here, I've got Metroidvania Forge.exe. Now that's fine. I'm going to just add debug to this. You'll notice that there's export with debug turned on. And this is something I want to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this, and it'll export the project. And that was pretty quick, right? Pretty quick. So now I can go to that folder. Okay, so I've got my Metroidvania Forge folder, and I go into builds, and you can see I've got my Metroidvania Forge debug.console.exe and debug.exe. Let's go ahead and just run this one. There's also this package file, which is like all of the game stuff, all the game data that it might need. Okay, or maybe not all of it, but it's some critical stuff. So I'm going to just run this one here. And make sure everything's working. It looks and sounds like it does. I've got my gamepad, so I'm testing with that right now. You can see I've got my save data because it's still looking at that same user data folder on my local machine from when we were testing. So I'm going to go ahead and just load a game. Let's see if it works. Okay, here we go. Cool. Save my game. Got my pause menu working. Okay, audio seems to be working. I go back to title, new game, begin slot 2. Ooh, that took a little bit, but it worked. Okay. We've got a little bit of a thing there. We might want to implement some kind of asynchronous load in the future for that. Okay. Transitions between levels are nice and quick. I'm going to turn down my music volume a little bit here. It's probably not too loud to you guys, but... Okay. So yeah, I mean, the game seems to be working, right? I want to point something out, though. This is a debug build, right? I don't know if I pointed this out before. There's our name and debug. So because it's debug, I'm going to be able to use some of the shortcuts we've built into the project. So like I can hold shift and hit plus or minus and change my HP. Okay, I can hit F7 for that quick load, or F5 for that matter would also work. But you probably don't want those things to necessarily happen. Now, maybe you do. Maybe you've got a select audience and you're going to say, hey, look, debug is enabled. Here's a list of what the debug does. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, there are some power users that you may want to do that with because it'll help them test features for you. You know, like, okay, if you push this button, it's going to take you to this screen and then you can test the feature or whatever, or unlock abilities automatically. Okay. But there are going to be times when you don't want that. And so when we come back here to our project export, I'm going to go ahead and just keep it on Windows here and export the project again. If we uncheck this export with debug, then we're going to get something different. Okay, so I'm going to remove that name. In fact, I'm going to add release just to make it obvious. Okay. And actually, you know what? I realize this isn't quite going to do what I want to, but I'll show you how to do what I want. So when I export this, did I export it already? Save. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, so let me go back over to that folder. Okay, cool. So you can see this one exported 2 files. It didn't export this console one, and it exported these. And we're going to talk about the difference, and we're going to talk about some special functionality that we can get with the release versus the debug. First off, with our debug, if we run this debug console, did we do this before? We may have, I'm not sure. You'll notice it ran it with this console. And what's handy here is if you've got someone who's smart and maybe they're running into a bug with the game, you can have them run this debug version with the console, and then it's going to output to the console your print statements or errors. So if you get an error that might show up, and then you'll be able to go, oh, okay, interesting, you got an error in the load system. Let me check that out in my code, right? So I don't think we're going to see anything here because I think our game is fairly bug-free right now. But that's kind of what that's for, right? Now, if we run this release version, nothing is going to be obviously different right now, except maybe, yeah, we've got all of our same slot loads, save and load slot data. It's all there. Okay. But one thing that's different, and it's kind of behind the scenes, the debug version is going to compile the code differently than the release version. Now, technically, the release version is going to be more performant. And so you definitely want to use this version when you're, you know, exporting your game for real. I'll go back to title. In fact, I'm curious if this new game is... Yeah, that was fast. I don't know why it was so slow when we did that before. I'll have to see if I can troubleshoot and reproduce that. But I want to come back into our project and I want to show you something. I didn't demo this, so let me show you something back in the release build real quick. I'm kind of scatterbrained today. Okay, so if I load my game, and if I hit F7, it's going to do that save. You know, I've got my shortcuts. I've still got my health bar, I think. Yep, I've still got the health bar functionality. I don't want that in my release build, right? So there's a couple things that we can do to handle this. One option, of course, is just to go through and clean up all that code. The second option is what I'm going to show you. So let's go in, let's start with our player because we've got some scripts on him that are allowing us to do some debug stuff. So player folder, And really, I just need the player script. Let me open that. And we'll look at the save manager as well. But here in the player, if I go to my unhandled input function, I've got this. It says get rid of it later. Maybe we don't need to get rid of it, but let me just label this as debug. Okay. Because all of this stuff in here, we only want to do while we're testing. So there's actually, I mentioned those system flags. So we're going to use a check. We're going to go if os dot, and then here you can check different flags. And Godot has some built-in flags. And so the one that we want is, what is it called? I can't remember. Is debug build? Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and look at this. Returns true if the Godot binary used to run the project is a debug export template or when running in the editor. Okay, so that debug export, right, that's that checkbox that we had at the bottom of our export dialog. And then it returns false if the Godot binary used to run the project is a release export template, meaning that little box is unchecked, okay? So we can just say if it's a debug build, then yeah, you can try and do that stuff. Otherwise, we don't want to. I'm going to go ahead and do this on my save manager as well. So just like copy this code here. I have an unhandled input in the save manager that we used to test, right? Just going to put that in there, wrap it, and we're good to go. So now what this means is we can only do these if it's a debug build. So like if I run the project right now in Godot, I can still hit F7 at any point and load a game, okay? Do my health bar, stuff like that. But let's go ahead and let's export and debug and a release build again. So I'm going to export both. So I'm going to come in here, project, export. We'll start with exporting the release build because that's how it's named. Oh, that's funny. Did I really name it that way? Okay, exported that. It's going to be a separate file because apparently I had exe in the file name. I'm going to export one more time. I'm going to select my debug just to get that name populated real quick and then say export with debug and save it. Okay. So fast. You'll notice that the debug build exports more quickly than the other one. If you had a really big project, I don't know how long it would take. But in my experience with these smaller games, it's always pretty lightning fast. So I'm going to go back to my folder where I exported those. We've got, let's go ahead and, let's see, I need to delete these ones. Those were the misnamed items. Let's run the debug. So I just exported this and you'll see I can still hit my shortcuts, right, and change things, okay? Now if I run my release build, F7's not doing anything. Let's load a game. See if I can change my health bar. Yeah, I can't. I'm pressing the shortcuts for it. I can't do it. Okay, so that's one easy way to make it so that you can keep your debug code in there. Just make sure from this point on, if we're working on a project and we want to add something that's debug only, then we need to make sure that we use that flag to check it, right? This is if OS is debug build flag. A lot like that is editor hint on the engine that we have that we've used in other places, okay? All right, one last thing I want to do is I want to talk about exporting for web. Now we're going to encounter some performance issues with this project. I already know that. I think if your primary target is web, then I hate to say it, but right now I think Godot 3 versions are a little bit better to go with. Some of the changes they've made to the engine and whatnot kind of set the web support back a little bit with Godot 4. And while they have made great progress in kind of improving that performance and removing a lot of those issues, there's still some issues remaining that they have yet to deal with Godot 4. And I'm pretty confident that they will fix them, but let's go ahead and just look at the export settings for web. Now, one thing right off the bat that I'm going to point out, there's this thread support. And if we look at this, if it's true, then it will support multi-threading. I believe this used to be true by default. It may not have even been an option. I don't recall, but this thread support being off is more of a compatibility default. So this is defaulted off because I think Mac and many other operating systems or setups don't work well with thread support. Some browsers don't support it. And so turning this off will make your game work better on the web. But this also has a negative effect on the performance. If you've got a really simple game, probably not noticeable. For our game, we might notice it. Okay. The other things that we're going to see performance issues on are going to be GPU driven things. So we're going to run into a few of those issues. Other than that, you don't really need to be too concerned about the other settings here. So let's go ahead and just export this, and I'll show you how we can embed this on itch.io, and we'll look at some of the issues, and we'll look at least at one fix for one of those issues, or workaround, I guess, and then the rest will be up to you in experimentation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and export the project. Now, one thing I'm going to do is, I've already tested this, but you'll notice I've got my file named as index. Yours is probably going to be the name of your project by default. But for exporting to itch.io, do yourself a favor and just call it index, because it needs to have that name, this HTML. So let's see, I'm going to go up a level. Let me go to my builds folder, and then I've got a web folder I've made here for my web builds. I've already exported one. You can ignore that. That was for testing. I'm going to go ahead and say save. And notice I have export with debug turned off, and that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and override it. You probably won't get that message if it's your first time. And then let's look at what that project looks like. Okay, so here in my builds folder, you can see there's that web folder I'd added, and then it saved all of these files. So this looks quite a bit different, right? We've got a lot of files that are hard to know what they are. Really what it is there's a web page file, it's an index, and then these JavaScript packages and other things are, and like that PCK are just project files that are needed to run the project. I think it's worth pointing out, if you look at the web build, it's pretty lightweight. If I look at the properties, 39 megabytes, not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and zip this up because it needs to be stored as a zip. So I'm just going to do zip file here. And I'm not too particular about the name. I'm just going to leave it named web. And now I'm going to go over to itch.io to a test dummy project that I've set up. Okay, so we can see here I've got my project test playground. It's just an itch.io page. If I view this page, then you'll see it's just a blank page, and I don't have a file provided to embed. Let me go back. This is important actually. If you're going to use an HTML playable project in itch.io, then you need to come to this kind of project and select HTML. Okay, so there's downloadable, HTML, Flash, Java applet, and this Unity if it's less than or equal to 5.3. Okay, so we're going to use HTML. Then we need to come down here to our files, upload section, and we need to upload that zip file. I've already navigated to my builds folder, and I'm just going to select this web.zip and open it, and it'll upload it here into my project page. Okay, once it's done, you can do things like change the display name. This is marked as an executable. That's fine. There's an option here that we need to check, and it's that this file will be played in the browser. Okay, so once I check that, options change, right? I'm going to go ahead and save. Now, when we view the project, you can see it's loading the game for the first time. Let me zoom in on this. And I'm going to go ahead and run, and we can configure it to automatically run, but hopefully this works good. There is a bit of a delay loading this. There we go. Okay. So we can see my game is working. I'm even able to use my gamepad, it looks like. Looking good. Now this, I've tested this before, so I'm going to have a save file here. But, you know, you could start a new game. And this is one of those first issues. You'll notice my camera's not centered properly and the game froze. Okay. Once it got running, though, it seems to be working pretty good, right? And I can hit pause, I can go to my system, I can adjust my settings. Okay. Everything seems to be working pretty good. And there's another hiccup though. Look at that. Some of these hiccups I've identified. That particular one I'm not sure I have. Okay, let's test our music transition here. Yeah, seems to be working good. Now, I believe it's just scene 1 and 2 that are going to have that little hiccup when we enter them. Yeah, this one was smooth. Save my game. Back to the dungeon. You'll notice that one was smooth as well. So there's obviously something about those scenes that's causing the hiccup. And actually, the scene 2 hiccup I haven't fully identified, because you'll notice it's smooth when I come from the save over here. Okay. So I'm not sure I can fix the hiccup on this one. Only happens when I go from scene 1 to scene 2. But just for fun, I'm going to just run through, test my game a little bit more. The map's working. Looks like it's working good, right? Just run through, test some of these levels. Make sure our audio's working. Open this door. Nice. Okay, back to my save. Okay, game's working pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the page so we can start the game anew. Okay, here we go. Run the game. Yeah, that initial load kind of hangs on this. I'm not sure what exactly it's initializing. There we go. It was a little bit quicker that time, though. So I can load my save game, and voila, we're back in. Okay, so really things are working pretty good with the exception of the little hiccup. And let's just go look at that one more time. And then I'll demonstrate to you what is causing that hiccup and at least one potential workaround. You can see it's going to just freeze for a bit. And notice that there were no particles. Nothing was running, right? And there's the hiccup when I go from scene 1 to 2. Okay. Now, I believe that the hiccup from scene 1 to 2 is based on something in scene 1, but I haven't identified it just yet. It might be the particle system in and of itself. So let's go ahead and go back to our Godot project and let's see if we can troubleshoot this a little bit. Okay, so looking at this scene, I think I had mentioned that GPU effects and things and settings can sometimes have an issue or cause issues. And I'm going to go ahead and just do one really simple thing here. And I'm going to disable this GPU particle. And it's going to take a moment for the particles that were there to finish emitting. And we don't have any scripts that enable this. So if I just leave it checked as disabled, if I run the project or the scene, we're just not going to have any more particles, right? Okay. Now that change alone is going to improve one of the hiccups because what's happening is this particle system, this particle material is probably having issues getting compiled efficiently in the web build. And so that's, I think, what's causing that hiccup. And so the game is starting at nothing is updating until finally we get those particles working. So let's go ahead and export this again now that I've disabled those. So project, export. And I'm just going to leave everything else as is and just say export project. Save it here. Yeah, overwrite it. Okay, and once that's done, we got to go zip that project up again. Okay, so I'm going to just delete web.zip and zip this guy up. Okay, we've got a new one. Now, when we go back to the itch.io page, we can swap it out. Okay, so the itch.io page, I'm going to go to edit game here and just scroll down. So you'll notice I could delete this file and upload a new one, but if I just upload then and select the web.zip, it'll recognize that I'm replacing it, right? So it'll just upload that in its place. Cool. I do need to reconfigure this. So this is played in browser. I'm going to go ahead and save that and let's go back to viewing the page. Okay, let's run this game again. And we'll see if we have any better performance when we start a new game. Okay, new game. I'm going to begin slot 2. Hey, look at that. That was like no hiccup at all, right? That seemed pretty smooth. The only difference is I turned off those particles. I still have this hiccup here. I'm not sure what that one is. I've already said that. I'm going to do some troubleshooting and see if I can identify it. Now, speaking to these particles though, I think, and I haven't tested this, so if one of you wants to try as a homework assignment, I think that would be awesome. And I certainly will be at some point in the future, but try using a CPU particle. Now, we can't convert our GPU particle system to a CPU particle system very easily because it's that a lot of those parameters are different, so we're going to have to reconfigure one. Dang, that hiccup is so bad. But try that, and I believe that the CPU particle system is going to be more performant on this web build, okay? But there we go. We can now export our project to web. It's not perfect, you know, and I've already mentioned at length why it's not perfect, but it works. And you can always scale things back and kind of make it work. Test it a few times and just iron out some of those kinks. Maybe we need to look at doing something like building in some special flags so that when it's a web build, we can disable certain items. You know, there's work that we can do if web is going to be one of our primary target platforms. But otherwise, you know, don't have to worry too much about it if you're focusing on desktop and things like that. Then, you know, just go ahead and make sure you optimize first for your primary platforms. But this is good information to have in mind. It's good to start testing builds of this before you're done making the whole game, right? So now that you know how to build a project, you can go back, you can add levels, add features, and every time you hit a good milestone, make sure you're building your builds for PC, for web, whatever target builds you have, send them to friends, send them to your beta testers, and get their feedback. Make sure it continues to run fine without hiccups and without performance issues. All right, so there we have it. That is the end of chapter 3. So in this chapter, we've built a lot of systems for our game, and it's come quite a long ways. If you can recall where we started this chapter, we didn't have audio, we didn't have a pause menu, no map, no save and load systems. It was lacking a lot of these features. And these are all, I think you would agree, core features that are kind of critical to the success of a game, right? If you can't save and load your game, then people are going to get frustrated playing it. At least for most games, right? And so we've done that. We've come through, we've added a lot of fun little polish, like our input hints and all the other little things we've done. So I hope you've learned a lot from it. Go ahead and give my video a like and show YouTube that it's worthwhile, or, drop a comment or both. And of course, subscribe if you're new to my channel so you can see what's coming next. Now, I can tell you some of what's on the horizon. Obviously, Metroidvania Forge series will continue. I'll be on a brief hiatus while I work out some of the kinks and things, assets that I need for the next chapter. Chapter 4 is going to focus on the advanced player mechanics and abilities. So that's going to be things like adding an attack state to our player, as well as the abilities like double jump, dash, the morph roll, ground pound, those different abilities that I've already mentioned. Okay, so we're going to hook each of those states up. There's going to be art assets involved and fun stuff like being able to do damage and take damage and all that's involved with that. So by the time we're done with chapter 4, our player is going to be more or less feature complete, or actually he will be feature complete for me for the purposes of this demo. But for you, hopefully it gives you ideas of how you can implement your own features, your own player abilities as you build out your game. So if you have any questions or things that you're looking forward to for that chapter, then please drop them in the comments below so that I can view and see those as I prepare. And with that, thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.